And we are live. All right, welcome everyone. For those of you who are new, how the session will flow today is we will go through some quick intros. So I'd love to hear from all of you, since we have a small room today. Just a simple intro on yourself, what your company does or what kind of products you sell and who your customers are, just to give me a better understanding of the context and just so I can give more relevant examples and also maybe even give more specific feedback as well. I will jump right into the presentation. There will be time throughout for Q&A, so feel free to interrupt me at any time or to put your questions in the chat. I will answer as soon as I can. And there will be time at the end for some discussion as well. And we should wrap up on time at 7:30. So that is basically the flow of it. Some housekeeping. I love to hear your insights. I would like to think that I've been in sales for quite a long time. I've been in sales for the past 10 years. But there's always new things for me to learn as well. So if you have found different techniques, tips, tricks, anything that has worked well for you, do feel free to share that with the crowd as well. Other things that I like to point out as well is do be honest. And if you see someone is beating around the bush, if they're not being honest with themselves, feel free to call them out on it as well. And lastly, be respectful. So sometimes I do have people dialing in from different places around the world. So if you have anyone coming off mute, if English is not your first language, just bear with them. I do like to try to create a welcoming and secure space where whatever we share will remain confidential and respectful within the webinar itself. So intros, love to hear from all of you. Where are you from? What is your business? Who are your customers? And what you sell?
I can volunteer to start.
Sure, go ahead.
I'm Joey. I'm currently in Seattle. I came here last August. I'm originally from China. So what I'm doing here in Seattle is I'm the rising second-year MBA student at University of Washington. Before I joined the MBA, I have been on sales and business development role for a couple years. I was the resources development manager at Habitat for Humanity. That's an NGO. And then I worked in resources development in a social enterprise. It is called Dialogue in the Dark. They have a very interesting service. If I can talk more later, I will talk more. And then I moved myself to Mexico City for 3 years. I worked in a professional service firm. I worked as the head for the Chinese market. So I bring the Chinese clients to the Mexican firm. And the last role I had is at a tech startup in Shenzhen. I sell virtual reality corporate training solution. So I sell different products and services. But as Jin said, I'm not perfect yet. That's why I'm here tonight to learn more about sales techniques. Thank you.
Wonderful, very exciting sales career you've had. Kevin, good to see you.
Hi.
I wasn't sure if it was you.
Yeah,
Good to
I was
see you.
actually cooking and I thought I was just watching in the background. But hey, Chin, it's been a while. I think.
Oh my God, Kevin!
Yes.
I was like in the kitchen doing some stuff, and then I was like, oh, I have to introduce myself. I better come to the computer.
I know. Yeah, it's so good to see you both. Yeah, so I guess I'll just do a quick intro because I haven't met Joey before. So yeah, my name is Kevin. I used to be a community manager for a tech and design school, and recently I just finished help manage a kids coding school. So had a lot of experience from the adult side and the kids side. Now I'm actually here just to understand, like, I've dealt with a lot of like salespeople, but I want to see like what's Chin's wisdom on, trying to, be in this like non-manipulative sales area. And I feel like, especially during the pandemic time, right? Like, I want to see what is a human-centric approach to promoting products and services to people. So here to learn, I'm actually setting up a community space, Holly Chin, with some ex-Red. As you know, that school have closed down because of pandemic and other things. So we want to create this community space where we will be probably partnering up with different people and stakeholders in this local community. So I just want to like try to like polish my communication skills and so on. So yeah, so that's my
Cool.
quiz, and it's nice to see you all.
Yeah, keep me posted. I'm interested in learning more about that.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I'll share more.
Great. Over to you, Holly.
How to start my video. Hello, I'm Holly. Hey. So I work at an agency. So we're a digital marketing, branding, and web design agency. And I don't really do sales. I'm in content marketing. So I'm in mainly like the marketing side of things. But I want to just learn more about sales because they connect quite closely. And I started to do a little bit of business development with our agency. We have a wide variety of clients. I would say most of them are not tech, but I just liked the non-manipulative sales technique part of this. So yeah, that's why I joined.
Wonderful. Welcome, all of you. Holly, as you are in marketing, as you go through this, oops, that's actually the Facebook. As you go through this, I encourage you to think about it from a perspective of copywriting. So think about how you're building your relationship with your customer as they flow through the content that you write. Maybe it's through the landing pages, maybe it's through email if you're doing email marketing as well. But a lot of this will also apply.
Yeah.
Great. So maybe a bit about myself, for those of you who are not too familiar with me. My name is Chin. I come from a background in sales, like I mentioned. I spent the first 5 years of my career in corporate sales. So actually what I will walk through today comes from the framework that I learned in corporate. I find that a lot of startups don't have a proper framework or methodology around sales. There's a lot of books out there, but I find that when you try to have too rigid of a framework, it makes it very unnatural for a lot of people. So hopefully what I'll be able to share will be easy and simple enough that a lot of you can digest this in a way that works well for you and find a style that actually suits your personality best. After corporate sales, I spent the last 5 years in the startup scene. So Kevin knows that. I worked for Spring. And in that role, I was working for social ventures. So because of that, I think what was unique and different is a lot of social entrepreneurs, they're usually very uncomfortable with the concept of selling. They're usually very passionate about the causes that they have. But when it comes to sales, a lot of them are, not all of them, but some of them are introverts. And a lot of them typically care so much about doing good that they don't think about the profit side of things as well. So in my role at Spring, a lot of my responsibilities involve coaching and working with the companies to help them really improve both revenue but also sales techniques as well. So that's a bit about my background. I'm currently running this company called Classy Novel, and the mission of this company is to evolve education to incorporate more elements of these type of skills, more soft skills. So less of the hard skills, but things like how to negotiate, how to build your network. I think sales is very much a soft skill as well. There's a lot of other things that go into it, how to persuade people. So yeah, just want to try to share some of my wisdom and also bring what I've learned to the table, and then hopefully have all of you walk away a little bit brighter today. Cool. So I'm curious, from all of you, when you think about sales, I'm sure most of you think about sales in different steps and stages. Which component makes you the most uncomfortable? Or which feels the most unnatural or manipulative for you?
For me, I think it's if the salesperson doesn't really understand the buyer and they're just trying to push something, whether it's the right solution or not. That's a problem on many levels, because probably that client won't even be retained, and they might think negatively of the company otherwise.
Great. So more of the pitching part of it, I guess.
I think for me is that when I'm assuming that there's a lot of companies that are trying to hit as many target revenue as much as possible during this pandemic time. And I feel that I've seen those companies that were just like, where their executives just putting such a crazy target, and it actually affected the way the sales team communicates to people. I'm not saying it's from my old workplace, but I know from other people, it's emotionally draining. It's all very numbers heavy. It's not just like relationships driven, but it's so numbers driven. So yeah, seeing those two sides, which one is more important, and how do you communicate that to your managers or boss, right? So
Oh, Joey's on mute.
When I just started my sales work, I feel that I don't have enough, how to say, the convincing ability to talk to the client. So I rely on the script a lot. So that makes me sound like a robot. But later on, I kind of build up the confidence, and I know like how to interact with the clients. I feel more comfortable with that part. But later on, I don't feel the negotiation on price. I don't like that part because like I feel that what we offer is pretty reasonable, and I don't have enough buffer for us to play around with the potential client.
Yeah.
So I don't know what kind of trick I can use to kind of like react to the client.
Great. Cool. No, thanks for sharing all of that. So maybe before I jump into the presentation, just to give you some perspective on sales, few interesting things that were mentioned. So one is when you look at sales versus marketing, typically, like Holly mentioned, they're both very well interlinked. What you will generally see is that marketing tends to skew more heavily towards B2C type of companies when you're consumer focused. B2B naturally is more sales focused. What you will also come to realize over time is that if you are a service-based business, so for example, consulting, agencies, education, which Kevin was working for before, when you are service-based, usually, not always the case, but usually relationships are very, very important. And the reason why, not surprisingly, is because a lot of service companies aren't very different from the competitors. They think they're different, but the way they articulate is really more or less the same. So I've seen many, many companies that say they're a marketing agency or development agency, and I really struggle to really see what's different about them and other agencies. So because of that, because the value proposition is a bit more difficult to articulate or convey as a message, any form of even verbal communication or like text communication is a bit more intangible. So because of that, usually they will rely very heavily on the experience. So once clients go through the experience of working with them, then they really see how they're different. And it's very hard to do it in a cold outreach manner because people don't get the experience until they've started working with you, even maybe it's on a trial basis or if it's like a referral or something like that. So if it's just your cold outreach, you might not find as much success. So just something to keep in mind.
So true. Sorry to interrupt you. Yes.
Yeah.
We have that very similar experience. So.
Yeah. So that being said, there are of course different ways that we can try to improve our techniques as well. There was something that I wanted to say, but I forgot. Anyways, I'll move on. So few key things that I'll try to go over. Oh, yes, I remember. So Kevin was mentioning like where, during downtimes, the sales manager will often drive the sales team to hit targets. One of my favorite quotes from one of the sales coaches that worked with me in the past was, never see profit as your end goal. Profit should not be your purpose. Profit should always be the result of doing something very well. So you don't say like, let's say when I was working with Win Mobile, now Freedom Mobile, for them, they never had their mission as profit. Their mission was always to be the best, cell phone carrier or mobile provider, right? And by being the best, they become the most profitable. It's not you be the most profitable and then you become the best, right? So when it comes to investing into relationships and sales, I think it is a long-term game. So if a sales manager is purely just based on the numbers, usually they will have that issue where they have short-term problems, where they might not have invested into relationships, and then during downtimes they struggle, and then they try to push their team again. So that kind of cycle does happen as well. Cool. So let's get into what I want to cover today. So first off, I want to introduce a framework that helps you really understand how to move someone all the way from a prospect towards a close. And then we'll talk about some more non-manipulative techniques. We'll go a bit into biopsychology, and then we'll wrap it up with sales mindset. Great. So the first thing I want to introduce is this concept in copywriting. I'm not sure if Holly, if you've seen this before. So it's called gradualization. Have you seen this before?
No.
Great. So the concept of gradualization basically means that the sales interaction or marketing interaction is not a one-time event. A lot of the times it becomes very inauthentic when you try to rush the sale, when you try to get someone to close within a single sales call or within a sales email. It is possible, but it's not often the case. So the idea is you want to understand what the micro steps are to escalate the customer, escalate them mentally so that they are going through realizations and actually becoming mentally ready to actually buy a product or service. So it's not about manipulating to get to the next stage, right? So the way of thinking about it is it's a series of realizations that they have to go through. So for example, this is usually the case in terms of what the flow might look like. But again, every business, every product, every customer is slightly different. But usually a customer needs to start out by believing that what they're doing right now isn't working. And then in this example over here, it's a social media training program. They need to believe that there's a better way of getting leads and making sales. They need to believe that they can actually make 6 to 7 figures a year without prospecting. And how they do it is by building a brand. And how to build a brand is through social media. And once they realize that social media is the best solution, they need to realize that this product, this social media training program, is what will give them results faster than any other training program out there. And then finally, they need to realize that they need the product right now. So generally, sometimes some customers might actually come to you and they've already realized steps 1 to 3, right? Or steps 1 to 5. And they are at the decision-making phase where they are just considering options. In some cases, they might have to go through the entire flow. So the idea is when you are creating content, or if you're going through a sales interaction, you want to be able to adapt to your customer depending on where they are mentally at in the funnel. So one thing that I always encourage teams to set up at a starting point is MQLs and SQLs. I'm not sure if any of you have heard of that, but if you haven't, MQL is Marketing Qualified Lead, and SQL is Sales Qualified Lead. So what you do is you can set up triggers to identify some of these behaviors. So an example is, let's say if I know that someone has visited my pricing page, then theoretically this person is a sales qualified lead. So if I'm interacting with someone who's visited my pricing page, the conversation I'm going to have with them is going to be quite different with someone who is still exploring and reading my content. Make sense? So you want to define some of these triggers. So some examples that I can think of include, let's say if you run workshops, it might be if someone has attended X number of your workshops, then usually they might be a sales qualified lead or a marketing qualified lead, depending on the type of workshops you run. You can have content. So for example, if someone has downloaded a guide or if they've read a specific blog post, it might indicate to you that they are at a certain stage, depending on what your content is, what the topic you're talking about is. So the idea is you want to be very mindful of how you actually create content to address customers at different stages and how you respond to customers that consume different content as well. Make sense? So I don't think we have an exercise here, but what I encourage you to do when you have the time after this workshop is to sit down and take this as the foundation and start by mapping out logically what you think is the flow that your customer has to go through, the series of realizations they have to go through in order to buy a product or service. And once you do that, you can start to map content onto it. You can start to think about how you can speak to them and all of that. Cool. So the framework I want to introduce is called GUIDE. And GUIDE, what it stands for is greet, understand, inform, discuss, and enrich. So in the greeting phase, as you think about gradualization, GUIDE itself will map very closely onto those series of realizations as well. So greet, what you're trying to do is these are people who are seeing you for the first time. So it might be when they land on your website, it might be the first few sentences in your email, it might be the first few words that come out of your mouth in a sales call. But the idea here is when you're greeting them, the first thing that you want to do is you want to establish a connection, right? Connections are the most important part of sales. And how you really form strong bonds with people and good connections is through acknowledgement. So a lot of people, the problem is they jump too quickly to pitching. They speak too much. And in sales, they say it should be 80% listening, 20% speaking. So acknowledgement is where you actually get to guide the conversation, but show people that you're listening. So how you acknowledge is by paraphrasing. So you can just repeat back what the customer is saying, you can rephrase it, and that really shows people that you're listening. So all you're trying to do in the greeting phase So let's say if you think about, let's say a website or landing page, or the first few words that come out of your mouth, you're trying to do two things. You're trying to, number one, build rapport. Number two, establish credibility. If you successfully do these two things, you are off on the right foot. So how do you build rapport? The idea is people are generally attracted to similar people. So you want to associate yourself with them. So there's two ways of doing that. So if you're writing copy, one best practice in copywriting, if you've learned about it, is to always call out the customer. Right? If you've identified the target customer, they will immediately associate the copy with what is relevant to them. So same thing, if you're speaking to someone, then the idea there is you want to do, the sales term for it is you want to find common ground. So if I know that, oh, if I'm speaking to someone who is also a new father and I'm a new father, then I can relate with them, right? And they can relate with me as well. So the idea is you want to find that common ground. And all you're trying to do is when you're building rapport, as people get to know you, they want to feel that they trust you. They want to feel that you really care about what they're doing, you are on their side, right? Credibility, on the other hand, is a bit different. Credibility is expertise. So this is where you highlight, how long you've been in the industry, credible clients that you've worked with, testimonials, case studies, things like that, or why you're so passionate about what you're doing. So this is how you convey credibility. This is why when you look at good landing pages, usually the things that happen above the fold are these two things. So number one, they call out the customer, and then usually you see testimonials above the fold, or like logos of companies that they've worked with. These things usually show up above the fold because of these reasons. Make sense? So that is agreed. Any questions here before I move on? Cool. So the key thing about the greeting is, like I mentioned, it's not about pitching, so it's not about you, it's more about them. So you want to try as much as possible during the greet phase to really start off by getting to understand the person that you're speaking to. And one easy tip is to notice something about the person that you admire and state it early in the conversation, right? So don't make it weird. Don't be like, oh, you are so gorgeous and sexy, like don't do that kind of stuff. But you want to notice something that is authentic. So be sincere with your praise. Don't just try to flatter people, right? And really it's focusing about them. And I think this helps so much because a lot of sales reps, when it comes to sales mindset, they are so focused on themselves. They're so focused on like, I want to hit my targets. I want to close this sale. And then the whole sales interaction becomes all about them getting the outcome that they desire rather than them giving the customer what the customer needs. So make the whole interaction about the customer, make it about them. So if you start with that as your mindset, it will really take a lot of pressure off you because then your mindset is not about, I want to hit my sales target. It's more about like, I want to give this customer what's best for him or her, right?
Do you mind giving an example of how to state something that isn't creepy to somebody when you just start talking to them? Like what's an example?
Yeah, let's say in the retail space, so I used to work in retail, it's a lot easier because you can visually see a lot of things. So, if you see that they have a really interesting phone or really interesting bag, so those are like sincere compliments that you can give out. These are things that take some time, some practice to come across. Sometimes you can say something as simple as, oh, but you have a great smile, or so small things like that. But it can become inauthentic if you're not used to it. So giving praise is something that you have to practice over time. So the way I try to practice it is by actually just giving praise to my friends. Generally, myself, I'm very conservative. I was brought up in a conservative Asian family, and my father always told me, like, if you have nothing nice to say about people, don't say anything. So it's made me into a lot of an introvert, and a lot of times I don't say things that I intend to say. But the idea is just start by practicing with your friends, and if you see that something interesting about them, if you notice anything different about them, start by practicing some of these small things. And once you get used to it, it's going to be a lot more natural for you with your clients.
Okay.
Yeah. And sometimes it's if you have recurring clients, it's just noticing the energy about them as well. Like sometimes I see some people and I haven't seen them in a while, and I say, hey, you know what? I noticed that you look really bright today, or
yeah, I find it easy to do if I know the person, but if I don't know them. But yeah, thank you for answering that. That helps.
Yeah, I was wondering, Chin, if it's like a cold lead, let's say, you never have an interaction with the person, right? I know that sometimes the sales team have like this plugin or tools to be able to talk their LinkedIn just based on the email that they receive.
Yes.
And you would be able to understand the person's background. So does that mean that we need to do, if we have that tools with us, we need to do a quick research, just if that conversation pops up, you just kind of like, hey, you know, like, I think what you're doing is great with your project or with your fundraising or with whatever it is. Is it, yes, is it something like that?
Great question. Two answers to that. So number one is the more customization you can give, the better, of course. But at the same time, when it comes to sales outreach, so the tool that you're talking about is like a mail merge tool, where you send out like a bulk message. Just to make sure I get the question right. So I'm assuming that that's what you're talking about. Like when you mail merge, when you're emailing a whole bunch of people, and you're like copy pasting like a script that you're using, for example, and making that making the opening sentence more authentic. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I guess it's more like there is this plugin where you can actually find, you know, a LinkedIn profile that is connected to that email. So you pretty much do a bit of a research of that cold lead, trying to figure out what's the background of the person, right? So I guess it's something like that as an example, right? Like you're trying to understand their background.
Yeah, actually, let me show you a quick example. You can see my Google Drive, right?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Let me just pull that up.
But I think you would only say their achievements or the nice things about them when they mention, you know, like, oh, this is my initiative in this X, Y, Z things, then you start like complimenting on that.
Yeah. So best case scenario is if you've actually done proper research and you actually take the time to customize your responses.
Yeah.
They don't have to be very long responses. They can be even something as short as like, hey, I recently saw that you blogged about this topic and you know, the article is great. It could be something as short as that. Or if you do the right targeting, you can also create very relevant praise that doesn't come across as inauthentic as well. So I'm going to give this a full screen so you can see. So when I was working for Spring, one of the things that we were doing is we ran a training program to help entrepreneurs learn how to raise money from investors. So naturally, because we focus on social ventures, the type of companies we work with are companies that care about some form of, you know, environment or social good, right? So because of that, when I'm targeting companies, I'm searching B Corps. I'm searching companies that have a social mission. So you can see over here, the opening sentence is, I came across Teen Job Fine on Gus. I believe we have aligned values to use business as a force for good. So that statement there is relevant and sincere, and it also builds some common ground. Make sense? Yeah. So that's one example, and you know that is a template that I can use for pretty much all of the impact-driven businesses that I'm reaching out to. I don't have to customize all of it, but it's still relevant. Great. Cool. Great questions. Another thing to be mindful about is when you open the conversation, people are naturally defensive to start. Everyone is always defensive, right? I've never met a prospect that starts off saying yes. So the idea here is you want to try to get them to say no, because no makes them feel protected. If you are trying to get them to say yes, then they feel like they need to commit to something and they tend to hesitate. So you can use this thing called a no letter, right? So instead, like if you say, do you have a few minutes to talk? People will by default say no, because they want to protect themselves. And then the conversation ends. But if you say, is now a bad time to talk? Then they will naturally say no, but it allows you to continue the conversation. So like this is not about manipulation, but it's more about making them feel comfortable with themselves. Because the idea here is people want to naturally protect themselves, be protected with that. Make sense? So think about how you can, if you are trying to come up with more can openings, start with a no just to get people more comfortable, and then you can slowly move on with the conversation. So that's the greeting portion. And then once you establish the initial relationship, you want to quickly transition into what we call discovery questions. The idea over here is the main framework out there is what they call needs-based selling. And the idea is you should never pitch a product until you really understand your customers and really understand their needs. So the understanding phase is core to needs-based selling because you want to try to dig into and understand the customer. So this is where they talk about asking open-ended questions. You know, they say 80-20, you know, listen more than you say. And what I find really helps here as a tip is when sales reps try to do this understanding phase, I find that they ask question after question after question, and it becomes very much like an interrogation. They say like, oh, tell me about like what phone you currently use. Tell me about where you currently travel. Tell me about how many people are in your family. And then it becomes like you're putting them in the spotlight. So the easy way to make it more of a conversation is just to acknowledge. And you can make a few comments here and there. So you can say like, oh, interesting, I see that you have the iPhone right now. You know, can you tell me a bit more about how you use it? Or you can say like, oh, you know, you have 5 people in your family. I have a big family too. I commonly find that I have this problem. Do you have this problem as well? So like if you follow up the conversation, it becomes more of a dialogue as opposed to just a interrogation.
Can I ask something? Does that apply to like a sales discovery call when you're asking questions to learn about their problems, or is
Absolutely.
this kind of like a small? Okay.
Yeah, I would say yes.
Okay.
Some of the examples I gave were more like more non-business conversation examples where I say like, you know, how many people do you have in your family? But if you say like, you know, tell me about challenges that you have with marketing, and if they respond like, oh, right now I really struggle with identifying my target prospect, then you want to try to follow up with that. Mm-hmm. So you can just say like, oh, so you mentioned you struggle with identifying your prospect. Can you elaborate a bit more on that? Like, is it the targeting aspect? Do you know who your target customer is, or you don't know where to find them? So if you just repeat it back to them, rephrase it, it makes it more of a dialogue rather than just asking them question after question. Make sense?
Okay, yeah.
One other kind of like superpower or hack is don't be afraid to write things down. I find a lot of reps, I don't know why, but over time, more and more reps feel like they don't need to write things down. I guess maybe 2 reasons. They feel like they're so used to the process of doing this that they feel like, I don't need pen and paper, I can remember all of it. But just the act of writing things down, it really shows people that you care and that you're listening. And so number 1, it really gives a good impression. And number 2 is you really get things correctly as well. So you don't make assumptions, you don't second guess yourself, you really ensure that you're really speaking to the right things as well. So don't be afraid to write things down. When you're going through the understanding phase, my encouragement here is you want to try to dig into core values. So what I mean by core values here is when people communicate with you that they have a problem, usually they're communicating a symptom of a problem. So for example, if I work with an entrepreneur and they say, you know what, right now I struggle with getting more customers. Struggle with getting customers might sound like a problem, but what's underlying that? Is it because you are not comfortable with sales? If that's the case, then you know it's more about mindset rather than technique, right? So you want to try to dig deeper, understand what is the root cause, and you want to understand the values because a lot of reps, when they start pitching, when they start showcasing, they will go into feature dumping. So I'll talk about feature dumping later, but basically you might say things like, oh, right now, you know what, let's say if you're a marketing agency, you might say, we do logo design, we can help you with designing a website, UX design, all this kind of stuff. And all of that is feature dumping. No one cares about features, people care about their values. They want to know how your UX is different from all the other UX designing out there. So for example, if you say logo designing, an example of positioning it more from a value perspective might be saying, the values that we create will help your brand be memorable for your customers. So it's that aspect of memorability, right? So you want to understand like what do they really care about. So this example over here, you know, sales rep, you're having delivery issues with your current supplier. How does that translate to your business? And they say, oh, it's delaying our delivery to hospitals and drivers who need, you know, product on time. And then what impact does that have on your efficiencies and bottom line? We spend a lot of time, energy, money negotiating returns, tracking down deliveries, it's cutting into our profit margin. And then you want to ask further, like, what would it mean for you to have guaranteed quality products delivered on time? Then you can quantify it. You can start to quantify the value. We spent over 5,000 last year alone on issues related to returns. So when you can start to quantify value, that's where it becomes very interesting, because when you start to position your solution, people can actually visualize and see like how your products or services will actually benefit them. So the outcome is a bit more tangible. It's more, especially if you have services where it's a bit untangible, where you're like, you know, I do consulting services. what exactly do you offer with consulting services? So you want to try to quantify value as much as possible. Any questions on this? Cool. So probe, don't prove. So if anytime you're unsure about anything, just ask the question. And when you do move to the pitch, which we'll talk about in a bit, you want to avoid pitching the same way twice. So when you pitch the same thing twice, what happens then is it comes across as being a bit pushy because you're saying the same thing expecting different results. Right? So that's a general tip there. So maybe I want to give you all some time to do some brainstorming and do some reflection. I want you to spend maybe about 2 minutes and list down 10 questions that you can use to help you uncover your customers' needs. And I will put myself on mute, but it can be any question. So I'll give one example. So when I used to work for telecom, and when I used to sell cell phone and cell phone plans, one obvious thing that I'm trying to figure out is how a customer uses their phone or how they use it for the camera, right? So if that is one of the features that I want to highlight, i.e. the camera, I want to understand how they take pictures of phones. So I might ask them, tell me how you use your phone to take pictures. So that's one obvious question I might ask. Or a better question is I might ask something like, do you have kids? If they look like they might have kids. Because if they have kids, then I can start to think about maybe specific features of the camera that I can start to pitch to them. So, if you have kids, kids typically are very difficult to stay still. So when you take family photos, it's very challenging. So, this phone has this special camera feature where it actually takes multiple pictures at the same time, and then you can pick one, something like that. Right? So that helps you understand how I can pitch when I'm thinking about how I'm asking the question as well.
Mm.
So if you're struggling to come up with some questions, think about what unique features you want to position when you're pitching, and think about what questions might help you uncover needs that will help you highlight and showcase those features. All right, I think we can move on. Maybe does anyone want to share some of the examples?
I can share. I have kind of general ones, so I don't know if that's. I guess that's a question. Is can there be more general ones? So, for example, I have what is the main challenge keeping you up at night? How long has that been a challenge? What initiated this being a challenge? Have you already tried to resolve it? If so, how? If not, why? And what would your ideal resolution look like? So it's kind of general. It could be applied to many. We work mostly with B2B, so that's what I'm thinking of. Or
you
is it
mentioned
like
you focus more on the marketing side, right? Or do you also offer other type of consulting?
yeah, marketing and brand.
Okay. If that is the case, my recommendation is I would try to target the question a bit more on the marketing angle of things or the branding side of things. And
For example, okay, so sorry, I did have some, see what you think. So my next one was, how do you currently generate leads for your business? How would you rate the success of that?
Yeah.
And how would you want to improve it? Something like that, like a bit more.
Okay. Yeah, that could be a good one.
Or what were you going to say? Sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, like, if you have like what keeps you up at night, people could go into like HR related problems or finance related questions, and they might not be relevant for you. So.
Yeah, I understand. Okay.
Let me think. Another one is, let's say if you're on a more branding related project, you might ask clients something like, what in your opinion constitutes a good brand? Like makes a good brand? Or can you give me some examples of some of your favorite brands and why they're your favorite brands?
Okay, interesting.
But yeah, basically, I think there's no right or wrong answer for what type of questions you ask. The idea is just to have this prepared so that when you're speaking to the customer, you don't have to go off the fly.
Okay.
One quick comment before I move into the pitching piece is, Joey was talking about using scripts. My recommendation is, sales is very much like public speaking. The more you try to follow a rigid script, the worse you get. So the best way to think about it is to think about it as buckets. When you have those buckets to follow, you know, like, okay, now I'm, that's why I use the guide framework. After the greet, the G, I'm transitioning into the U, the understanding. So I know, okay, what's next? If I'm trying to understand the customer, I have these set of questions I can pull from a few different ones, right? Or if I'm trying to, after what happens after the understanding phase, inform. So I know I'm going to pitch next. So the idea is just to know the flow. You don't have to follow a rigid script per se. So on the informing side, my recommendation here is, if you remember, I mentioned acknowledgement is superpower. This is the best time to summarize everything. So before you pitch, I strongly recommend that you actually just say everything that the customer mentioned, just to make sure you understand everything and get everything correctly. But also it really just shows them that you're listening and that you really understand them. And they also better relate to you. They feel like, oh, this person really understands me. Therefore, this person's on my side, can give me a better or more relevant solution. So let's look at this thing called the feature benefit value cycle. So what you want to do now is, because you've asked some of those questions to understand their needs, to understand their values, your goal there is to tie all of your features to their values. Because at the end of the day, features, like, they can mean different things to different people, right? If, let's say, in this case here, you can see locally grown, benefit could mean help the environment or no transport, and the value might, help someone feel like they are part of their community. Or organic could mean healthy, can mean I can keep my family healthier, right? So the values can be different to different people. For example, if I say help you increase revenue, help you make more profit, profit could mean security for one person. Maybe I have payroll, I can pay all my employees, or it might mean freedom to someone else. And freedom and security are opposing values, right? So the idea here is you want to understand those values, and when you pitch those features, you want to tie them to those values. Make sense? When you're pitching, you want to start by talking about the values, transition and highlight, show them the benefit of it, and tie it back to the values. As you think about values, one quick thing to remember is, when you're wondering, like, what exactly is a value, the best way to think about it is this way. Mario is your customer. When Mario gets the flower, that is your product. Don't pitch the flower. You're pitching the value proposition, which is what Mario becomes when he has the flower. So your product allows your customer to throw fireballs, become invincible, and that kind of stuff, right? So the idea is, remember Super Fire Mario, that is your value proposition. So one quick thing I want to talk about when it relates to informing, it is a bit off tangent from the guide framework, but there are, I mentioned the needs-based sales framework is one main framework that's out there. The other one that's actually gaining a lot of popularity is what they call the challenger sales. So a challenger salesperson is different from a relationship-based salesperson because the challenger has a different view of the world. The challenger loves to debate and push the customer. And the reason why this framework is so valuable is because I think the authors of the book, they actually found that all top salespeople are usually challenger salespeople. So it doesn't mean that everyone should be a challenger salesperson. Follow the style that works best for you. Needs-based sales is very effective. But if you notice top salespeople, because they are usually a challenger salesperson, they tend to perform better. So the main core here is a challenger salesperson needs to position him or herself as someone who understands the customer's business better than the customer understands their business themselves. Make sense? So what makes it different then is relationship builders, you're focused on being accepted into the relationship. A challenger is you actually push your customer out of their comfort zone because you know what is best for them. So it's not about their convenience, it's more about making sure that they maximize their value. Relationship builders, like I mentioned there, you're asking those open-ended questions to figure out their needs. A challenger salesperson already knows their needs because they are an expert in the space. So for example, when I was working with Spring, I might say, we've worked with over 400 entrepreneurs that are social ventures. We know social ventures inside and out. So we know the problems that you face even before you face them. It's not about waiting for them to tell you what the problems are. Make sense? So again, it's not for everyone, but it's really good for the people who are super passionate about the space and have a lot of experience in the area. Cool. So the idea is the approach around Challenger Sales Framework is to focus more on educating the customer, showing the customer, reframing things, making them realize things that they had as wrong misconceptions, busting myths, and really tailoring the solution to make them feel like this is for them. And the idea is the Challenger salesperson is very different. They control the conversation rather than the customer controls the conversation. So I won't go into too much detail, but you can read an article here. So I'll share the slides as well. So bringing you back to Guide, because I think Guide is just a bit more natural for most people. So once you pitch, I'm not going to go into any examples, but assuming you've already done that conversation, you've talked about your features, you've tied to the values of your customer, the next step here is the discussion phase. So that's a D in Guide. In the discussion phase, your goal here is to talk about next steps. So that's what discussion means. What are the action items? What's the follow-up? And the follow-up is usually closing, right? So these are the 4 areas of discussion. So number 1 is you need to know if your customer is ready to buy. And how you do that is through buying signs and trial closing. And then to actually make the close. And then when you try to make the close, of course, some people will not be ready because it's almost impossible to read every situation 100%. So the idea is how do you navigate those objections? How do you overcome objections? So let's go through each of those. So before you close, of course, the one thing that you want to keep in mind is BAN. So BAN stands for budget, authority, need, and timeline. Your customer needs to have all of this checked off before you can try to move to a close. So do they have the budget? Are they the right decision maker, or do they need to speak to someone else? Do they actually have a need? If they don't push it. Your product is not right for them. And then time frame, right? Are they ready to make the decision now, or do they need more time? Do they, budget cycles, fiscal year, things like that? So you need to take all of this into consideration. But if you know that your customer checks all of these off, then it's likely that you can try to move towards a close. So buying signs, the obvious ones, there are physical ones, which include mimicking your behavior. So, if you tend to cross your arms, if your customer is crossing their arms as well, it's actually a good thing. It's not necessarily a bad thing. If you're leaning forward, they're leaning forward as well, then that's another good sign. Positive body language, smiling, nodding. One very fun thing that you can do is you can try people watching. So if you have some time, go to a food court, sit down, and just look at people when they're looking around to different stalls. And you will notice that when people are ready to buy, subconsciously, they will move their hand to their wallet or to their bag, even though they don't know it. So you can actually see this in a lot of sales interactions as well. So I encourage you to do some people watching, and you'll actually start to notice some of the signs, and you can actually see it when you're interacting with your customer as well. So of course, if you have to do sales like online like this, you miss out on a lot of those visual cues, so it's a bit different or difficult. Verbal would include things like agreeing, positive words, delighted tones. But what about virtual? So virtual buying signs include like if you have email tracking tools implemented in your company, if you notice that someone has opened your email 20 times, that's a good sign, as opposed to someone has only opened the email twice, right? If the email has been forwarded, so you can actually track that kind of thing as well. If you see it's open from different IP addresses, then again, that's another good sign. If they've engaged on your website, if they've tried a free trial, if they've visited your pricing page, if they've visited your product page over and over again, all those are positive cues for you to know that they might be ready to buy. Make sense? So those are virtual buying signs. One concept for you to just think about, maybe you don't have to implement some of these things right away, is in biopsychology, there's this thing known as the decision threshold. And the idea behind the decision threshold is that people will make a change, whatever the change is, when they mentally evaluate, and this happens subconsciously, but the idea is when they feel that the cost of staying the same outweighs the cost of changing. So for example, if I feel that right now, if I don't upgrade to a CRM tool, I'm losing out on a lot of sales, and the amount of sales that I'm losing out exceeds the amount that I have to pay to use the CRM tool, it will motivate me to switch. Make sense? So when you're thinking about this decision threshold, there are two ways that you can move the lever and get people to move, to convert. Number one is you can highlight and dig into the cost of staying the same. So that might include things like highlighting regulatory changes, penalties that people might have if they don't implement your solutions, lost opportunity, inconvenience, loss of time, things like that. Or the other option, which you might have more flexibility of doing, is actually reducing the cost of changing. So one example of doing that is, I remember working with this company back at Spring, where they were actually selling to hospitals in the US. And what they were doing is they were selling this software that will allow hospitals to manage all of their interns. And for them, when they tried to get the hospitals to switch, one of the things that they would try to do is they would have this legal contract that the hospital has to sign in order to start becoming their customer. And that's a high cost of changing, right? Because people think like, oh, if I'm gonna use this product, not only do I have to pay for it, but I also have to commit to it because there's a legal contract. I'm worried about liabilities, things like that. And then I have to worry about other things, like what about tech security? What about integration with existing software, things like that. So the more you can reduce the cost of changing, the easier it is for someone to switch. So one of the things that we did is we did some mystery shopping, and we found out that one of their competitors actually did not use contracts. And what they used instead was they actually had customers use a free trial, and the legal contract was actually in the terms and conditions. So it's like more of a software side of things, where like, in Facebook, you don't actually read the terms and conditions, but it is implied. So that way you're still protecting yourself legally in some ways, but it's not as formal, but it really accelerated the sales cycle. So instead of taking a year on average to close customers now, it took them only about a month to close the customer. So big difference in sales cycle. So how can you reduce some of that cost of changing? Another example is when it comes to budget, for example, let's say if you sell a big solution. So for example, in Holly's case, if you're doing marketing consulting, usually most of your projects might be upwards of 20,000 or more, right? So if the ticket size is expensive, usually you'll find that the sales cycle is longer. So typically anywhere from 3 months to a year. And I personally think that 3 months is too long. I believe the sales cycle should be less than 3 months. So how can you reduce that? So one example is Traction on Demand, Vancouver-based company. They do Salesforce implementation. So Salesforce is a CRM tool. And Salesforce, because you want to implement a CRM, it's a very big decision. You need to get corporate buy-in. You need to get your employees to understand how to use it, adoption, train your employees, there's costs, there's tech implementation, will it integrate with all of our other solutions? So there's a big cost of changing. So what they do as their mini offering is they say, if you're considering changing your CRM tools, we will come in and do an evaluation project with you. It's only $5,000. So it's a small project, small enough that the decision maker can say yes without escalating it to their CEO or whatever. But they can say, come in, we'll do an audit for you, and we will give you a comprehensive report of changes that you can make, different CRM tools that you could use, and how you can implement all of that. And you don't have to decide to use Salesforce, you don't have to decide to use us. But the idea is, you have this report, you are empowered to do whatever you want to. And of course, if you believe that you get good value out of it and you want us to help you implement Salesforce, we are happy to do that for you as well. So that's how they bridge that gap. It's kind of like the thin edge of the wedge. And they find that 80% of the customers who get the report end up actually working with them. So how can you reduce that decision threshold? Cool. So sometimes it's, I usually bring this up with entrepreneurs because they have more flexibility around how they change their offerings. So if you're in a big company, the bigger your company, the less authority you have around making some of these micro offerings. But that is a really good idea to think about as well. Cool. So the next step that I want to talk about, so that was a bit off tangent, but the idea here is trial closing. So how do you know if the customer is actually ready to buy? So we talked about buying signs, but buying signs, some of them are not entirely, not as apparent. So trial closing is another way. So what you want to do in trial closing is you want to ask questions that at this point, you're deliberately trying to solicit yeses. And the idea behind it is if people are saying yes to you, it's a positive sign and it shows you that they're ready to buy. So if you say, do you understand everything that I just said? Do you like this product? Do you believe that this will solve your problem? If you say things like that, and if they say yes to all of it, there's no reason why they're not ready to buy. Make sense? So this is how you test the waters to figure out if they're ready to buy before you actually go in and say, like, let's sign you up. So that is trial closing. I love that. I personally use it a lot, and I find it's one of the strongest tools in order to really transition very naturally from the pitching to the closing. And then the closing, simple, is you just have to ask. A lot of people feel really uncomfortable with asking for the sale because the money starts to come into the equation. But really, if you don't ask, like, the answer is always silent. So your customers will expect you to ask. A good analogy to think about it is if you come to someone's birthday party and you come in with the present and you show the present when you walk in the door, but you walk around the entire house and at the end of the night you leave without giving the person the present, that's what you're doing if you're not actually closing. So make sure you actually put the ask there and give the person the opportunity to work with you, because you've actually taken the time to work with this customer, understand their needs, and really show them how your solution works for them. At this point, they should want it. It's like you're giving them the present there. They want it, but you're not actually handing it over to them. So really, all I can say with closing is you, as the sales rep, you need to drive this. Customers will not drive the closing process for you. You need to always be in control, and you need to steer them towards the right direction. So how do you do that? One thing that I commonly see a lot of reps do as a mistake is that they don't set clear next steps. So for example, if you do a demo call with a client, you need to know what the next steps is. So for example, if you know that the client is not ready to buy because they need to talk to their manager about it, and then they want to get back to you on that, then ideally you want to try to book in the next call during this call instead of just letting them go off on the conversation. Because once you've locked down the next step, then they also know when the timeline is, and the whole transition, the process becomes clearer for them as well. It's not left as a vague thing that happens like, okay, now what happens after that, right? So try to set those next steps, book the next call, agree to a timeline, and you want to understand how they want to proceed as well. So maybe we'll skip over this exercise, closing statements. I want to actually go into some best practices and more examples. So number one here is when you do make the ask for the close, be confident about it. Never doubt yourself. Another thing is, this is a good time to shut up. I find a lot of sales reps talk themselves out of a sale because they are just so anxious and they want to hear back from the customer. The best thing to do is just shut up. Like, you will actually under-negotiate yourself if you try to get back to the customer too quickly. So give them time. Sometimes they need some time. Some quiet or absence of conversation is okay, right? Questions that you can also use to further the conversation is you can encourage the customer to sell themselves to you. So you can ask questions like, what do you see yourself getting with this product or service? Or how would it affect your business or life? And they will talk themselves into like, oh, you know what? I think that if I did this, we could get more customers. Then you're like, okay, makes sense. So they're basically selling themselves on it as well. So this is where I want to actually spend a bit more time. The challenge with a lot of people when they try to close is they try to use false scarcity. They do things like, oh, limited time discount, or like sign up before this date, or we don't have X many of seats, that kind of stuff. So what you will notice is urgency. There's two categories. There's internal urgency and external urgency. So external urgency are things that are outside of the customer's consideration, things that are more environmental focused. So for example, it might be time-based. You might say we have early bird pricing, or we have limited amount of seats. These are things that don't motivate the customer, but they have to do it because they don't want to miss out. Internal urgency is actually more important, more powerful, and this really comes from the customer. So if a customer says, for example, in the work that I did in spring, if a customer says, oh, we need to raise money by May this year, or we will run out of cash flow, I know their timeline. I can drive them to close on a sale much better than just saying like, oh, our program intake is this date. Right? So the idea is if you know their timeline, you can push them on their timeline, and they will not feel that you're pushing, because they themselves said it. Like, I'm trying to hit this target by this date. So then you can say, oh, in order to hit the target, for example, in my conversation, I would say, oh, did you know fundraising, you can't approach an investor and expect to close an investor within a month. Right? Usually it's a 6-month process because you need to get the paperwork in order, you need to build a relationship, and then you can start to move towards a close, and then you need to negotiate with the investor. So most fundraising rounds take at least 6 months. So if you want to close in May next year, you need to start now. So that's how I would position in terms of driving urgency. I want to quickly play this video. Let me see. I think, yeah, you should be able to see it and hear it. But I'll give you the link as well, just in case. But I love how Google does it. So that's the link in the chat. But I'll play this video over here. Great. So I love that ad. It always makes me a bit teary-eyed. But I think, this is definitely more marketing-centric than sales-centric, but you see the point here. This ad, the reason why it's so amazing is because it speaks to your internal motivation. It's not your external motivation. I've seen like many weird ads, like I think one of the recent ones was something that ICBC had, and they had like people speaking in different voices, like animal voices talking about like car insurance and stuff. Like those kind of ads, you're like, what the hell does that mean, right? It doesn't tie into internal motivation. Like when you see this ad, you can see like, hey, there's a story behind this. And it's not just about like searching for the sake of searching. There is like something that this person wants to do. You can understand what their internal motivation is. So if you can create content that speaks to internal motivation, it is a lot stronger and it will drive the urgency a lot better. Some examples of questions, you can ask people like, how much longer are you willing for it to be this way? How soon do you want to see these results? And the idea is you are holding them accountable to that timeline that they set. So maybe before we talk about B2B closing, any questions? Any comments? Good. So some quick tips around B2B. Like I mentioned, you want to identify those next steps and be clear about it. You want to try to get decision makers in the room if the person you're speaking to is not a decision maker. So sometimes in B2B, they have multiple stakeholders. So you have what we call the advocate. So people who might really like your product. There's also the user, someone who uses your product, and they might or might not be also a decision maker. So for example, if I'm selling a platform where I help people with tracking their sales, for example, the user might be the sales rep, the advocate might be the manager, but the decision maker might be, let's say, VP of sales, or there might be other decision makers that could be blockers as well. So blockers could be finance department, it could be tech department if it doesn't comply with their regulations and whatnot. So you need to consider all of these. So if you need to get multiple people in the room together, you want to try to get them together so that you can pitch them together as well. So if they say like, oh, you know what, I'm not the right person for this, then you might say, hey, can you try to schedule a call with me and actually get those people in the room so that I can tell them about our product. Make sense? Another strong thing is people tend to over-formalize the process itself. So I talked about that example with the legal contract. One example that I really love from another consultant that I know is what he will do is he will get people in the room and he will do whiteboard strategy sessions. And at the end of these pre-strategy sessions, he will just take a picture of the whiteboard and that will be the MOU. So he'll say, okay, we've identified your problems. We know what action steps we can take to solve it and how I can actually help you. And that is the MOU or, light contract. So instead of having like a formal proposal that goes out, that's what he uses. And I think it really works a lot better that way. So the more legal things become, the more people feel like, there's something that they're committing to and they don't hesitate. Another thing that is, if you have to use legal documents, the recommendation is instead of giving them a document, which then they have to escalate to legal department, is to actually give them a draft. Give them the understanding that this is a collaborative document that you're working on together, then they will feel like they have a say in it. And I mean, it should be that way as well because they should have a say in it. Right? So it's a bit more natural and they'll commit to it more readily because they understand that this is a process that considers them and it's not just your terms, it's also their terms as well. Cool. So let's talk about objections. So like I mentioned, there's no perfect way to close. Sometimes you'll get objections. But the key to remember with objections is often not the end of the road. You need to be persistent, but you don't want to be pushy. So how do you do that? So I'll give you some examples later. But the idea is when I think about persistency, the framework that a lot of people will say is you want to get at least 3 no's. So yes, you want to get at least 3 no's, but again, like I mentioned, you're not pitching the same way 2 or 3 times, right? You're not doing the same thing expecting different results. So you don't just say like, why don't you want to buy? You want to buy? No? Why don't you want to buy? Don't say the same thing over and over again. So you can position it in different ways. So I'll give you some examples. But the best thing to do is even before objections come up, you want to actually plan for it beforehand so that when they do come up, you know how to address them. So actually, let me skip ahead. Oh, actually, I don't have it inside. But one hack that you can use is if you address an objection before it arises, technically it never becomes an objection. So this is where marketing and copywriting is key. So for example, if you know that one of the common objections you have is, let's say, pricing. Or for example, okay, this is a great example. So recently I've been addicted to boats. I've been looking around for inflatable kayaks. And one big objection that I have is like inflatable kayaks will probably puncture more easily than solid body kayaks. So I noticed at one website that I was reading the other day, the first thing that they mentioned there is a common myth is that inflatable kayaks are less durable than solid body kayaks. And then they talk about all the details about why that's a myth. And then they talk about how their materials are different, how it's more durable. And they say things like, you know what, when you look at search and rescue vehicles, marine vehicles, most of those boats, they're usually inflatable boats. And those are really durable. So you can actually have inflatable kayaks, but also have them be very durable as well if you use the right materials. So that's where they're addressing that objection before it even comes up. So technically, because they've already addressed it, if they go in to try and close me, that objection will not be a question that I'll have to ask them. Make sense? So in copywriting, in marketing, this is where you can really shine through and address some of those as facts early along in the conversation. So that is the hack that I want to talk about. So maybe let's look at some examples around how to be persistent without being pushy. So number one is, like I mentioned, sales is not a one-off interaction. There's usually multiple touch points. You need to escalate the conversation. So it becomes pushy when you try to do it too quickly. So there are usually a few touch points. And when I say touch points here, it's not like you get rejected 5 or 7 times. It might be, someone visits your website, that's touch point. They read a blog post, that's touch point. They read an email, that's another touch point. They finally jump on a demo call, or maybe they attend one of your webinars. So all those are all different touch points as well. So that is something that you can add into consideration. So when you actually have your MQLs and SQLs, another thing you can do is what they call lead scoring. So lead scoring, you can do it with CRM tools. And the idea is you can attach a value to a lead based on activities that they've done. So for example, if someone has visited your web page, they get a score of 1. If they visited your pricing page, they get a score of 5. But the idea is the higher the score, the warmer the lead. So the more activity someone is doing, if someone has opened your emails 5 times, attended 5 of your events, jumped on the demo call, they're much more likely to close because they have had more touch points with you as well. So that's what you want to try to track. How to follow up. So other things to think about is you want to be honest with the customer. So especially if you're in a challenger sales type of situation where a customer is actually telling you no, but you know what is better for them. So that's where you can actually tell them the truth, even if it's hard. And say, you know what? You might think that you're not ready for this, but if you don't do this, this is what will happen to your business. So you can try to position yourself in that way without being pushy as well. Let me see if I have some examples. So yeah, this is one example here. And I'll go back and show you the other one. So the bad example is like, let's say again with the phone example, because that's what I used to do. One way that people would try to upsell or cross-sell is they would sell accessories for phones. They sell cases, tripods, things like that. So you might say, which accessory would you like? And then if they say, no, I don't want any accessories. If you say, are you sure you don't want to try? If you don't want any, what if I give you a discount? That is a bit pushy because you're just basically asking for the sale in different ways, but it's the same type of ask. So it does make you look a bit desperate. So another way of doing it is if you look on the right side, you position the ask in multiple areas throughout the conversation. So for example, I might say, based on your lifestyle, here are some accessories that will go well with your car. Take some time to check them out while I set up your paperwork, right? And then you come back to that and revisit that question later on in the conversation. So after the paperwork, you might say, hey, so you had some time to take a look around. Have you decided on which accessories you might need? And then if they still say no, then you might say like, are you not getting them because they're too expensive? Maybe I help you save a little through a bundling discount. So that way it feels a bit less desperate than the one on the left side. Make sense? So that's one way to be persistent without being pushy. You're not asking the same question the same way. You're asking it in different ways. If you have to do follow-up, and I love this because this applies not only to sales emails. So if you're looking for a mentor, if you want to do an informational interview to get a job, if you're trying to reach out to an investor, this framework really works really well. And if you're wondering who's that guy, that's Ramit Sethi. He actually has this great book called 50 Proven Email Scripts, and this framework comes from him. So the first email is what they call the email intro email. So I showed you an example of my intro email. So short and sweet. All you're really doing in an intro email is talking about how you found the customer, giving a quick, sincere, and relevant praise, and then you introduce yourself, and then you make the ask, right? So in that email that I showed you, my ask was, are you raising capital, or are you planning to in the next 6 months? So it's a very specific ask, and all I'm asking for is just a yes or no. If they say, no, I'm not raising capital, I stop bothering them. If they say, yes, we're thinking about raising money, or we're currently actively looking for investors, then I can follow up and try to jump on a discovery call with them. Make sense? So that is my ask. So you can see I'm not trying to move to a sale right away. I'm trying to just get them to say yes first, and then I can slowly escalate the conversation. If I don't hear from them, then I send a follow-up email. So that's email number 2. That's a reminder email. I'll show you an example of the reminder email. So a good reminder email, number 1, is not a new email. So you should never send your reminder email as like, hey, check out this article, or you know what, I have this blog post that I think you might like as well. Or don't say things like, why haven't you replied yet? Or I haven't heard back from you yet. So try to avoid those kind of statements, or try to send something that is not related to the first email. A good follow-up email should just be a short and simple email. So I'll give you one example here. Second. Let's see if I can find one. Which one was a follow-up email? This is a new email. It's not here. So you can see I say, hi Shani, just giving this a bump up in case you missed it or it got buried in your inbox. That is the follow-up statement. That is golden. If you follow up this way, no one will ever feel that you're pushy. All you're saying is, I'm not sure if you missed my email, got buried in inbox, just giving you a bump up, and then I just repeat the ask. That's it. Right, so that's the second follow-up email. You can send it 2 to 3 days after the first email. Email number 3, if you still don't hear back, and if you really want to pursue, you can try, but the recommendation is third email is actually not an email. So what you will do is, this is where you will call them, either cold call, maybe you might reach out to them on LinkedIn or Twitter or maybe even Facebook if it's appropriate. But the idea is you might say, hey, I'm not sure if email is the best way to reach you. Just thought I'd try reaching out to you on LinkedIn. That is all you're doing, and then you repeat the ask. It does not come across as being pushy. You're just saying, hey, not sure if email is the best way to reach you. Just thought I'd try reaching out to you. If you still want to follow up even further, you can. So that's the fourth email. The fourth email is called the breakup email. And the framework for the breakup email is you start by giving what you call the guilty parachute. So the idea is you give them an easy excuse, and then you make them feel a bit guilty. So you might say something like, hey, I'm not sure if your office has been closed because of COVID. So they have an excuse. And then I just thought I'd try following up one last time because I really respect what you're doing in this space, and I think that you might care about what I have to say, or something like that. Right? So you make them feel a bit guilty, but you're also giving them an easy excuse, and then you repeat the ask. That's all you're doing with the breakup email, and you say, this is the last try. I'm not going to bother you anymore if I don't hear back. And I guarantee you, if you follow this format, it will work. I've seen entrepreneurs use it. I've actually coached some entrepreneurs. I've used it myself. And if you look at response rates, on average, most email campaigns, outreach email campaigns, the bad ones are usually about 5%. And I say bad is actually industry average, is usually 5%, because most people don't do it the right way. If you use at least this, you'll get at least 30%. Minimum 30%. I'll actually show you, like, mine is actually about 80%, 80 to 90%. So if you do it the right way, you can get really, really good response rates. Let me pull up that email workshop that I have as well. Great. Just to show you again, that open email that I sent. Well, I'll actually show you a LinkedIn message instead. And I'll show you my open email. So this was one that I received that I really, really liked. So really short message. So Elizabeth messaged me. She said, I've built successful product agencies. I built a successful product agency, and I'm writing a proposal series on onboarding do's and don'ts. Your name and background came out on my growth radar. Would you be open to sharing how you convert traffic? That's all she said. What was so beautiful about the opening statement is she quickly introduces herself. She sets the context. She says why she is reaching out to me. So my title at the time was Head of Growth, so Growth Radar. And then she's making the ask, would you be open to share it? She's not making a complicated ask. So she's not saying, can you tell me how you do it? She's just saying, would you be open to share it? So it's a yes, no question, right? And we ended up having a conversation. I ended up on a call with her as well. So that's an example of a good opening statement. You can see with my email here, I mentioned the first line, and then I give my intro. We help mission-driven companies raise seed capital, especially if they're looking for impact investors. And my ask is bolded, was wondering, are you raising a round or planning to in the next 6 months? And I just reiterate, Spring specializes in providing training, coaching, and mentorship on fundraising. Let me know if you're raising and we can dig deeper. That's it. And you can see here, open rates, 87%, response rates, 98%. You don't see that in industry average, right? So again, you have to send it the right way. You have to use the right tools. And I have a whole different workshop on that. But the idea is if you do it the right way, you definitely will see results. So I think we talked about some of those. Yeah, I talked about this. Oh, one other tip is if you're not sure about an objection, this is the one single part in the entire conversation where it's safe for you to make assumptions. So if you tell a customer, are you not sure because you think it's too expensive? The customer will actually tell you what the reason is. If it's not price that is the issue, they will actually say, you know what, it's not too expensive, I just need to talk to my wife about it. So they will actually clarify the objection if you get it wrong. So this is where you can actually make an assumption and just throw out a statement. Virtually overcoming objections. So if you have to do it virtually, if you don't have the ability to do it in person or through a phone call, this is where you actually want to use like guided walkthroughs. And the theory behind this is that most people don't make the conversion into a paid customer because they don't know what the next steps are. The process is vague. And when the process is vague, people have doubt and people naturally fear uncertainty, right? So if you can actually show them like, this is what happens when you work with me. Like first we do a quote, then we actually build a roadmap for you, and then these are the next steps, blah, 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 blah. If you can build a roadmap for them and show that to them, there's a guided walkthrough, they will feel more comfortable as well. Or the other option is if you're doing like automated webinars and stuff, you can have different drip campaigns depending on actions that people take. Or if you do e-commerce, for example, if someone has landed on your product page, they've checked out, but they didn't actually successfully complete the purchase, that's where you follow up and send them, hey, do you notice like you have this item left in your cart? So that's where you actually create customized messages to help follow up that helps overcome those objections as well. Oh, sorry, a lot of content. This workshop's a bit longer than I expected. But the last piece, and then we can wrap up, is the enriching. So what happens beyond the close? So after you close the customer, this is actually a really great time to set expectations. And this is key because I find a lot of companies have bad reviews, bad kind of customer service experience because they don't set good expectations at the start. And if you do this correctly, this is really going to make a big difference in your company. When I used to work for Freedom Mobile, as you know, Freedom Mobile is a much smaller carrier. A lot of people have the assumption that Freedom Mobile has terrible coverage. It's not going to work everywhere, and people are going to be angry at them. Strangely, when I used to work for Bell, so I've actually worked for Bell before as well, I had more angry customers when I worked for Bell than I had with Freedom Mobile. Because when we were trained to do sales, they actually trained us really, really well, and they showed us how to set expectations properly. So we would actually tell customers like, you know, this is your coverage area. If it doesn't work, this is how roaming works. You know, this is how you can still make emergency calls if you need to. There's going to be a charge on it. When we set all those expectations, people don't get surprised by it, and we never get angry customers. Bell, on the other hand, they say, we work everywhere. And then suddenly a customer goes out back in the middle of nowhere, and then they're like, oh, I have no reception. And they come back to you and they start yelling at you, right? So if you don't set expectations the right way, then you get angry customers. And a quick reminder here is if your customer has to back out, then it's okay. It's still okay to actually cut the conversation short over here. So for example, you know, if I was looking for a win and a customer says, oh, you know what? Sorry, I forgot to mention, like I frequently visit my parents' place in Whistler, and my parents' place in Whistler does not have coverage for win. And then I'll be like, okay, fine, never mind, that's fine. Or I might ask them like, oh, you know what? How often do you go there? Like, do you go there once a year, twice a year? If that's the case, you can still use it for emergencies, but there's going to be roaming. So then you can try to address those objections if you need to. But the idea is you want to really set those expectations well, or else you'll get angry customers. Follow up, that is also something that is really underutilized. You and me have probably seen this, like when you shop for even retail. When was the last time you made a purchase at a store that was over $1,000 that someone actually followed up with? Like, my God, I bought a car last month and the sales rep has not followed up with me yet. So people don't follow up, and follow up makes a world of difference in terms of giving people a good experience. I remember when I bought a handbag for my wife, that was like 2014, I think, or 15. And the manager of the store actually gave me a personal call and said like, hey, you know, how's your purchase? Like, does your wife like the bag? And that really touched me, right? So if you make small gestures like this, it will make a big difference in getting referrals and getting more customers in the future as well. Cool, I think I talked about all of those, so we can skip on, follow up, all of that. So yeah, just to kind of give you an understanding of guide, not only in a conversation context, you know, like I mentioned, if you're in B2B, the greet could be the intro email. understanding phase could be the discovery call. The informing could be the demo. They don't all have to happen in one interaction, right? It could happen within one interaction, but it could also be spread out as well. The D is the proposal, the E is the onboarding. On your website, the greet is the part above the fold. The U might be, let's say you give a quiz or survey, and the I might be your product page. Your D might be your FAQs, your call to actions, your checkout page. Your E might be your confirmation emails, right? In retail, the layout of the store, the storefront, that is the greeting. The greeting questions, and then the understanding is what questions you ask your customers. The I is the demo, D is the closing, and then the E is the setup, right? So you can apply to any kind of content. Cool. So just to wrap it up, your goal, if you're still feeling uncomfortable about sales at this point, is all you are trying to do as a sales rep is you want to leave your customers better than when you found them. If you go into it with this mindset, you will not feel greasy, you will not feel pushy. Again, like I mentioned, it's about what they want, not about what you want. Don't think about like, I need to hit my targets, I need to do all of this kind of things. If you do it right, you will hit your targets. So just focus on the customer, give them what they want, not think about what you need. Oh. So takeaway is guide. That's all you need to remember. And sell them what they want, give them what they need. Right? Sometimes customers will think they want something else, but your goal is to really speak in the language that they resonate with. Cool. That's basically it. Upcoming workshops, I have one next week on, interestingly, negotiating a raise and promotion. Some of you might be interested in that. Charlene is actually the speaker for that. Charlene Fothergill, who is the head of HR for CTO.ai. And then I have one on list building. I have another one on sales emails, which I kind of showed some of you some of that as well. And then I have one on September 15 on startup ideation and brainstorming. And yeah, I think I will pause there. Any questions, any comments?
I have one question about you. One of your first slides, it was an example of the gradualization something, and it was about a course. Like you don't need to do prospecting. This social media course is what you need. Something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Is that real? Like, what is that course, or is that just an example?
That is actually a real course, and I got it from a friend of mine who worked with, I don't know if any of you know Matt Astefan. He runs this internet marketing group. It's changed quite a bit. I don't know if he still has the course, but you can look it up. You can look him up. He used to run a social media training program. Yeah.
Okay. Matt Astefan. So basically, it's like a social selling program for salespeople, right? Okay.
It's changed quite a bit since then.
Okay, that's all right. It's okay. I can look as well. I was just curious. I was wondering if it was yours.
No. I mean, if anyone is curious on how to work with me, I do sales consulting. So I have customized solutions depending on what people need. So I can do pro bono, like customized consulting based on hourly or even monthly or based on projects. But I also have a sales training program if anyone's curious on that. So this is a bit more comprehensive. It's actually a month-long program. It goes into not only the technique side of things, but more on the strategy side of things as well. So how do you optimize revenue? How do you build a sales strategy map, marketing strategy map, growth engines, user funnels, what tools can you use? How do you automate your process? How do you set metrics and goals? How do you hire salespeople? Things like that as well. So this is a month-long program, and the next cohort is in October. So I do run this as well.
So that's mainly for tech founders, right?
Yeah, the reason why I say it's mainly for tech founders is because I touch a lot on the strategy side of things. And normally, if you're not a founder, you don't have control of the strategy. So you can still benefit from it, but not as much, because you might not have a founder who is open to new ideas or open to changing things. Why I say tech is because that's mainly my strong suit. It will apply to service and product businesses as well, but it is more for B2B because it is sales, not really on marketing.
Okay, what's the cost of this?
The cost of it, I think, is $7.95.
Okay. I might get in touch with you about it. I'm going to think about that. That might be interesting. My boss is open to change and all that, so I might be. I don't want to take on sales, but I just want to learn more about how. Yeah, it sounds like you're talking about how the whole thing links to like the bigger picture. So
if you have BD people on your team and they would get value from it, you can actually send it to them as well.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's $7.95 including that. Cool. It is designed as a part-time program, so they can still do it while they're working full-time as well. Cool. Otherwise, that is it for today. Here's my contact info. You can connect with me on LinkedIn as well.
For sure. Yeah, definitely wanting to catch up with you. I feel like this is like really insightful. Thank you. I mean, coming from a marketing background, kind of like refresh some of the, the strategy, and then maybe like one day we can implement it in for some people that needs it. But yeah, I gotta jump off. So we'll check in soon sometime. And also Holly,
it's good to see you, Kevin.
Yeah, good to see you.
I'll message you.
Take care.
Yeah. Bye, Joey, too. Yeah.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Right. See you around.
Bye, everyone.
Yeah, and if Holly and Joey, if you don't have any other questions, we can probably just end the session as well.
Yeah.
Okay.
Really informative. Thank you very much.
Yeah, no problem.
Thank
Hope you all
you.
enjoyed it. See y'all.
Have a good night. Bye-bye.
Bye.